A little bit about me. I work for RevIO. I'm the Director of Data and Infrastructure, so handle incidents now on a variety of different levels with my team, which is always kind of fun. I'm SQL at speed everywhere online, Twitter, blog, GitHub, all of that. I get to play with race cars once in a while, so SQL at speed kind of fit. So if you don't like the session but you want to talk motor racing, happy to do that afterwards as well. This is a little bit more about me. The only really interesting part here is I run the user group in my hometown, which is about 4,500 miles away from here. Thank you for being part of BITS. Thank you for supporting events like this. Stay plugged into your local community, user group, whatever, as much as you can. It has changed my life to be a part of these, and if this is kind of your first time at something like this, find a local user group. Talk to the Microsoft folks. The Azure Data community people I'm probably not pointing the right way. They're out there. They support over, I think, 160 user groups worldwide now. So definitely talk to them, see if there's one close to you that you can help out with. That is enough about me. Deepthi, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time for attending SQL Bits. I'm so very excited to be presenting with Matt Gordon here. I'm a database administrator, and I have several years of experience as a DBA, and I have seen several issues as well. So I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I did my master's in computer technology at Eastern Illinois University here in United States. And also I'm a friend of Redgate, just like Matt Gordon. We are friends too. And I'm also a co-chapter leader for a couple of user groups for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion user group, and also Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group. Also, I'm a volunteer for Women in Technology user group as well.
Yeah, so one thing I forgot to mention and did mean to, so you mentioned we were both friends of Redgate. If you get a chance, go visit their booth. They've got some cool swag. Generally, even if you don't want to talk to the sponsors, I know how that can get. They scan your badge and they email you a whole bunch for weeks on end. If you're interested in their product, tell them. If not, just go say thanks. Events like this don't happen without them. So as much as we may roll our eyes when the email comes in, like, are you still interested in product X? It's nice to at least go say thanks and probably get some swag too. So there's a lot of sessions at a conference like this that are like, troubleshoot that, troubleshoot this. We put triage in the title intentionally, and that's for a few reasons. And number one is knowing what to fix is just as important as knowing how to fix it. And I don't know if your environment's like mine, but every day is a new day. Like one of the people that works for me says, every day is a treasure hunt. It's just some days the treasure is something you don't want. But one thing we're hoping to kind of weave through the stories here is sometimes what seems like the problem to fix isn't the problem. And sometimes you're confronted with 3 or 4 all at the same time. And triage and kind of thinking your way through that is going to help you put those in order and make sure you attack the right one first. Probably a lot of us have jobs where we're constantly asking, we're constantly being told, here's priority 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and that matters all the time because we want to make sure we're investing our time in the right things. When you're under pressure, it matters so much more because you really, if 4 things happen at the same time, the ability to kind of either have those prioritized for you, which is generally not the case when you're talking an instant outage, something like that, to have the ability to kind of think your way through those and know, what's really bad, what's kind of bad, and we can fix it next week. Really, really helpful here. Most importantly, it means your instant handling, troubleshooting, whatever, starts off with a sense of order. And speaking from experience here, kind of centering yourself a bit, especially when you're on an outage call, you're on a hotline and everybody's on there yelling, and I've got a story about that. It kind of helps start you from a good place, and you're going to get to that problem faster. You're going to get it fixed faster as well. So I always hate kind of boiling words down into 3 points, but I felt like for triage, this actually fit. And this is just kind of my take on it. So, like I said, both for online folks and folks here, keep it lively. If you disagree with something up here, feel free to raise your hand. It's not just for questions. Comments are good too. So, prioritize. What's an incident? What's an issue? I don't know how your organizations are set up, but mine is set up where our what we call client success team kind of has a direct channel to my team. And so a lot of times some initial troubleshooting, or at least nothing against them, an initial attempt at troubleshooting has been done, but they're not all that technical. It's gotten very dark in here now. Fun. So sometimes the initial analysis from them, hey, this is down, hey, this is slow, is not correct. So kind of rapidly, if that situation is similar for you, kind of rapidly figuring out or learning to translate from non-technical folks to what the technical issue may be can be helpful. Distribution is important as well. So like I said, I run an infrastructure and a data team. So whether you're in a position of leadership or not, there are likely, unless you're a smaller shop, multiple teams involved in this. So just because, and we'll talk more about this later, just because somebody says, well, it's a database problem, doesn't mean that even if the error says that, it could be other things. So knowing when to involve other teams, and we'll get into more depth with this later, that can be a really important thing. Don't just take somebody's word for it when they're like, this is broken, unless you know they have the background and knowledge to say that. Lastly, attack. I think a lot of us are probably faced with something where time is of the essence to get the fix, and making sure that you and your team, once you've gotten things into the right order, swarming that problem can be very, very helpful. All right, so now I'm going to attempt some acting. I'm going to play a developer. My query is running slow.
Oh, man. Sorry about that. But can you please, because I'm a DBA, right, I ask more questions. Can you please tell me, apart from that, a little bit more about it? What do you mean by it?
I mean, it was running fine. Like, it was working. I never write bad codes. The query is running super fast. Now it's just isn't. So there's something wrong with your server. I don't know what. I didn't change anything.
Oh, man. Did you ever face this kind of problem before? Did ever developer come to you, to the DBA, and said, like, the vague questions asking you to fix the problem without providing any information? Once a wise man said, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. So whenever you see those kind of performance troubleshooting requests, right, without sharing much information, without even knowing, like, the developer might not know what was going on, but he might be depending completely on you, and it is up to you now to figure out what the problem is, right, to figure out and find out the problem. So if you face those kind of situations, the vague questions that they have, and to figure out the problem, what are the steps that you take, the basic steps that you take to find the problem? If I receive those kind of problems, I will first check on the performance DMVs, because the bottleneck might be anywhere, right? It might be the CPU bottleneck, memory, or the storage, IO issues, right? So I will be checking on the performance counters, certain DMVs, to check if it is waiting, if the query is waiting on something, or is it running and taking more CPU, or it might be taking more memory. The memory grants that are being requested for the query might be more or might be less. It may be less due to the stale statistics, because as you know, the statistics, if the statistics are affected, if they are not accurate, then it might be it might also affect the memory grants that are allocated to your query. So where the query is going wrong, right? Why it is running slow? It might be the inefficient query plan. If you dig deep into the query plan, it might be the operator. There is a terrible operator out there which is taking more time and resources to move to the next operator, right? There might be blocking scenarios which you do not know. And there might be several other waits like SOS, schedule yield, which are caused by the high CPU and high memory. or like the query itself might be written very poorly, right? The standards that are followed are very poor. They need to actually figure out and fix the query itself to solve the problem permanently. Or it might be the contention problem from the MDB, right? There might be several situations that you need to focus on to, to get into to get to know about the problem. So Matt, do you know any, what kind of steps do you take, right, do you take to figure out the problem?
Those are all good, and we'll get to a question here in a second. Those are all good. I think one thing, and I've spent some time, and this is not to endorse theirs, but just I have friends at Redgate. I am a friend of Redgate. So I spent some time with them talking about the changes to their monitoring tool. So I'll broadly say, if you have access to a third-party monitoring tool, if you have budget, that's going to be helpful. I'm going to tell a story here about a time when I had a job where basically we had to roll our own. And it was very challenging. I actually shared this in a panel the other night. There's a reason me and none of my team is still there. It was a very high-pressure environment with no budget for tools, and it was a 24/7, 365. You're fined if you're down a minute kind of thing. But we were writing all our own monitoring stuff. I don't recommend that if you can help. And so I'd say access to any sort of third-party tools can make some of this research a little better. If you don't have that and you have a modern version of SQL Server, I'd recommend turning Query Store on. That is, it's not a third-party tool. It's a native tool. There's a ton of helpful information in there, and there's a lot of good community resources for that. Aaron Stellato is here or was here, gave sessions on that. So when the recordings come out, I think in a week or two, definitely kind of read through her stuff. She's who I go to. I actually asked her a query store question yesterday. So that can be a good resource there if you're in that spot where I was, where it's like, listen, it can never go down, but also we don't have any money for you and your team to get something where pictures can help you solve it. So yeah, lots of good stuff there. We have at least one question from online.
Do you have any specific form monitored counters to look at, especially as first one can be easily overwhelmed by the amount of performance counters you have to interpret?
That's an excellent point. So the question was, do we have any specific perfmon counters to recommend, especially because perfmon can get really noisy? I mean, we've all seen once you add even just a handful of stuff in there, the graph and such can get loud. Deepti, I'll turn this over to you first. Are there counters, and I even though that's not what the question was about, or specific DMVs that are always kind of your go-to?
Right. For the memory specifically, I have taken the notes. I assume that they might have this question, and I wrote some notes here. So from the memory perspective, I see the memory pages per second because that will give you like how many pages are written to the disk. That is one of the counters I look into. And when we talk about and also I look into the buffer cache hit ratio, because if that percent is high, then that means we are good. And from the storage perspective, I look into the physical disk object as well as the average disk read per second and writes per second, as well as the average disk queue length. Usually, if the average disk read and write per second, if they are like very low, like 10 milliseconds example, that means it is good. But if it is more than 20 milliseconds, that means we need to look more into it. Those are my takes on it.
Yeah. Those are all good. Yeah, I'd say, especially if you're walking into an environment new, so obviously nobody cares what my bio is, but I did consult for several years before I have the role I have now. And so I'm going into a lot of new environments without a lot of information or misleading information. You go in and the team's like, yeah, everything's great. It runs really fast. I don't know why you're here. There was obviously a reason I was there. But yeah, disk latency. Like if you walk into an environment where there's just general performance problems or kind of cascading problems where they're like, well, 90% of the time it's fine, but then like it all gets really slow and we don't know why, and the plans don't look weird, they're just taking longer. disk latency for sure is a good kind of baseline thing to look at, especially if you're in an environment where it might not have been the best infrastructure folks in the world that built that. They're going to tell you, well, I ran disk speed once and it was fine. They didn't run the right test or something like that. So starting at that level, especially if your environment's new to you, can be pretty helpful. A lot of that, basic stuff, it has to be right for us to do the rest of the cool stuff. Were there any other questions online or in the room?
No question, but there is a comment.
Okay.
Just learned from Calvin Klein that it is vital to have a checklist as well in order to be able to work under pressure.
Yes. Yeah. So the comment was, and it was probably from Kevin Klein's session the other day, having a checklist is vital to working under pressure. So I'll talk about that a little later. That's a really good point, and I might have learned that from him. Kevin is a wealth of information on stuff like this. But yeah, we're going to talk about that a bit later. But having checklists, runbooks, things like that do help you kind of focus and do the right things. All right, well, if there are no other comments, we're going to tell some stories here. So these are all true. Some of these were our fault, some were not. So we'll go ahead and dive into these here. So 4-hour client outage. This was on a client that fined us $1,000 a minute if we were down. Now, spoiler alert, they didn't actually end up finding us for this because of a very complicated, obtuse reason that nobody here cares. But anyway, we didn't have to pay them. But at the time this was going on, I thought we were going to have to. So the pressure was high. As you'll note from bullet 1, this was mostly my fault. So what happened was, it was basically, I used to run a system that was a government benefit redemption, and it was from grocers. So somebody is in the lane and they're swiping their card to get their food from this program. And if my stuff was down, they didn't get their food because the transaction wouldn't go through. So obviously the states back in the state that would buy this from us, not much tolerance for downtime at all. And this was a large state. I can't say who. There might be a mouse that lives there. So we had a normal scheduled failover, but it was early on, really in our adoption of always-on AGs. It was early on in our contract with them. And to be fair, it was early on in kind of the maturation of our processes for this sort of thing. We were learning as we went, for sure. So the normal failover went. We were just doing basic maintenance, patching. I think the infrastructure people had something they had to apply to Windows as well. Anyway, on schedule, not a big deal. Not to get too into the weeds, because this is probably way out of the scope of this session, but our failovers were unique in that we would do the normal SQL Server bit, but our operations and networking people thought they were a little smarter than Microsoft was and did some DNS gymnastics to basically make the web servers resolve to the failed over AG faster. We ended up ripping those out because, as you might think, they cause more problems than they solve. You're generally not smarter than the people who wrote the product. Sometimes, but mostly not. So what happened was I hit the button, they hit their button, and unbeknownst to us, we had a cluster quorum issue under the covers. So we kind of got into a split brain mode where it wasn't really failed over, but it wasn't really up. Now, the person that had helped me set this up had left me a sheet on exactly what to do when this happened. But I didn't have that with me because I didn't think I'd need it because it had never happened before. I, instead, tried to fail it back over, which was exactly the wrong thing to do at that point in time. We were down for 4 hours, which coincidentally was roughly the length of the call to support, because at that point that was what was needed to fix it. So, like I said, I used to come to conferences like this and figure like, oh, everybody up on stage, they're just like the best DBAs and data engineers ever, and they never make mistakes. And yeah, no, that's not true. What I learned from this is a couple things. If you are given resources, whether it's a consultant, whether you built it yourself, whether it's somebody on your team, collection of blog, notes from a blog, have those ready, and we'll talk about some ways to have those kind of at hand. And be patient. Had I waited like 2 minutes more, basically it would have automatically done what I jumped the gun and tried to make it do. So along with being organized and having all those resources at hand and a list of what you should do, good or bad, which I should have built, which I build now, just be patient. I was very worked up, something like this is going to be my fault, and if it's down for 30 minutes, it's $30,000, and that's part of somebody's salary. Just focus on the task at hand. I didn't, it was a big problem. I got yelled at. It didn't cost us any money, but it certainly could have. So, like I said, relax and calm down. That's what I didn't do. That's what I should have done. Trust your monitoring. So I'm going to go over on the next slide, and this is specific to always on availability groups, the next slide, but in general, trust the monitoring you have. Like I said, there are third-party tools. If you don't have the budget for those, or if you're in an environment where your manager is just intractable and says, we don't have the money, you can't have those, come and talk to me afterwards. I've been in that boat. I think I can help you out. But combine those tools, honestly, with some quick scripts or Azure Data Studio notebooks, which are really, really cool. Have those ready, and those will often return information to you quicker than some of those other tools. And what's on the next slide is a couple scripts, actually, that I used to use to get kind of an instant health from my AG, because, again, we didn't have third-party tools at that job. And then the one they adopted kind of right at the end of my time there, the always-on availability group monitoring, was generally non-existent. So I was reliant on the dashboard in Management Studio, which was certainly buggy at that point in time. So a script like this can help. Now, there's not a soapbox up here, but I'll get on one for a few seconds. How many of you have messed with Azure Data Studio at all? Yay. Okay, cool. If you haven't, try it out. I used to do a session about like Azure Data Studio for the DBA. Does it replace every single thing that Management Studio does and do it in the same way? No. Is it worth your time? Absolutely. It has a lot of cool features, and what's really good, especially if you're in a scenario where you're part of a team or there's offshore or nearshore help, so you're turning over your runbooks and your plans to people that don't necessarily work for you. These are invaluable, because what an Azure Data Studio notebook is you can basically combine code, screenshots, text, videos, all sorts of things into one thing, and you'll get the results live. So let's say you had to turn your overnight maintenance over to some outside place. And, it used to be when we would do that, it's like, here's the script you run at 3 a.m. Eastern. When it completes, take a screenshot of that, put it in a Word document, email it to this person who will, save it off to SharePoint. Notebooks can be source controlled, first of all, and second of all, the results will all be saved in line. So if it's like, run these 3 scripts to fail over the AG, and then run this other script to show me that the primary is actually where it's supposed to be, they can just run each cell. You can have the instructions and screenshots in line right there. They get to the end, they save it, and they check it back into source. Super, super easy. I really wish I'd had this a long time ago, because I would have had in that notebook the resources that I had that weren't with me. They were at the office back when that was a thing, and not with me. Before I get to the scripts, there's a question? Cool.
What's your opinion on end-to-end monitoring? So monitoring how the app works and uncover it from there.
That's a really, really good one. So I have a story, kind of a couple down here, that talks about that, but multi-layer monitoring is really important. And I'm not going to recommend a certain tool. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them, the quality depends on how you set it up and how much you take advantage of what it does. End-to-end monitoring is really important, because I have definitely consulted at places where the only place they invested in monitoring was the database. So they had a really detailed view of what the database was doing, and the developers got off scot-free. It's like, well, the problem's not our stuff because, like, it's still up. The database must be slow. What's it doing? Yeah, if you can afford, and New Relic is the first thing that comes to mind, but there's plenty of other tools out there. Monitoring your other layers is really, really important. And there's a story later where I'll talk about that, where everybody's like, it's the database because the error was, but that wasn't the problem. App Insight, yeah. So I actually mentioned log analytics later. So Azure, if you don't have the budget for third-party stuff, but you're in Azure or you're going there, Application Insights, log analytics, all that stuff is kind of coming together really nicely. It costs a little, but it's really, really good. So I'm not going to show these right now. If we have some time at the end, I'll get through this. Like I said, this is a brand new session, so we're kind of figuring out timing here. But these are, so this top one, and it's on my GitHub. This is the script that I used to use because we ran probably 25 AGs. That was the script I always ran as soon as, like, I got a call and they're like, the AG's messed up, database is down. I would run that script and it would show replica lag, and it's a nice baseline because it kind of gives you, there's arguably too much information in there, but you can customize it to what you want. And it gets you familiar with all the DMVs that are kind of underneath that, which any monitoring tool is going to use. And then also, going back to Azure Data Studio Notebooks, so the Microsoft Tiger team makes extensive use of those. And so that second link there is the Tiger team's GitHub. And there's notebooks for all kinds of stuff, diagnostics, best practices, all these sorts of things. They have an always-on bit of that tree that has some really nice notebooks for monitoring, for kind of instant information, what's going on. I didn't have that because that didn't exist back from when that story's from, but really good stuff there. Next one, daytime client outage. Those are the best ones, right? At least nobody woke me up. This time it wasn't my fault, but I was told it was briefly. So what happened was we had, again, a series of always-on AGs. Junior storage admin was told to run the cluster validation wizard in the middle of the day. If you've never done that, the cluster validation wizard does indeed validate that your cluster is properly set up. What it does as part of doing that is briefly offlines every storage volume underneath it to run some basically checks on it. What happens when you offline all the storage volumes under a SQL Server service that's running? It doesn't run anymore. And so that's what happened. But this started out as, and that third bullet tells it, we had what was called a hotline. So if something went down, there was an email that would go out from our home-built monitoring, basically say, call this number, red alert. So we called, and it happened to be that one of our executives was in a meeting with this particular state that had gone down. They noticed it. They yelled at executive. Executive turned around and yelled at me. Operations turned around and yelled at me because the database was down, but they were getting yelled at. It was not fun. Not a great way. You know, I think it was a Friday, if I remember right. So a really lousy Friday afternoon. What did I learn from this? I had to calm others down. I was pretty calm that day because as soon as I went into the logs, I knew what had happened. I saw that we had lost storage. Because all of a sudden it's basically saying, I can't find these files, I'm going to shut down. TempDB's gone, which, you know, it's bad. So I had to calm others down. And I hate the term soft skills, but what got us to fix this faster was that I had the ability to calm down a couple people that were swearing at me. I won't say what they were telling me to do or what they were saying I should do, but it wasn't nice. And that kind of comes back to this. I was a little further along in my career. Be confident in yourself and what you're seeing. Trust, going back to that last slide, trust your monitoring, trust what your tools are telling you, and present that calmly but firmly. And that's what it took. And it was, you know, again, I'd had some experience with this, so I could say this is what happened, this is how it happened, I don't care who did it, but, you know, it wasn't our team, let's work together to bring this back up. Second point there is if you have complicated infrastructure, make sure you at least understand the basic concepts. So when I started out running always-on AGs, and this applies to anything complicated at all, virtualization, whatever, make sure you understand a little bit about it. You don't have to be an infrastructure expert. The infrastructure people don't have to be database experts. But make sure everybody kind of knows how everybody else's part at least fits together, because it gets you to a solution faster. So don't be that DBA that's, all I do is data. I don't, everything else is magic. I don't know how storage works. I don't know what the network does, what the server's on. I don't know anything about that. I'm the data person. If you're a DBA, you don't have the luxury of that anymore, because all of our infrastructure is complicated at some level now. Last but not least, the concept of a hotline can be very good if the right people are on it. Ours wasn't. We had a lot of people whose title started with C. And with all due respect to them, they are not helpful when things break. They want to be seen taking action that can very often be the wrong type of action. They have their PowerPoint, their phone, do this, do that. Their title, their role is different. They trust the pros, and that is a fight worth having. If you're going to have a hotline, sure, maybe you need like a communications person or somebody to tell the C-suite, yep, here's what's going on, they're working on it, blah, blah, blah. But make sure you keep as many executives and managers off that call as you possibly can. All right, one more story from me, and this goes back to kind of the comment earlier. Client says we're down. So this happened to me actually fairly recently. Our app performance had kind of fallen off a cliff in the middle of an afternoon, again a Friday. But it was strange. Especially once you get to know a system, there's a certain cadence that things go at, and this was not there at all. The client had seen a database error that kind of rose through the stack. So they called client success contacted my team and said, there's a database error, things are timing out. The database is down. Had we taken their word for it, we would have wasted, I don't know how much time trying to figure out what was wrong with our servers. Long story short, as the fourth bullet says, the actual culprit was we were in the middle of migrating some things, and there was an issue with our Azure Express route. Our provider had made a minor mistake. It kind of resolved itself after about half an hour. But things were timing out from Azure down to the ground sometimes. They had done some maintenance that didn't go perfectly. So going back to what I said kind of in that last story, and trusting what you see kind of goes to this too. Trust but verify when somebody sends it to you. It says, this is a database error, the database is down. Get those other teams involved if you need to do that, because you're going to get to where you need to be. So in complicated environments, and which, like I said, most of them are now, escalations can cross teams. So make sure you get at least somebody from all the different disciplines and teams involved. Make sure that every part of your infrastructure, going back to kind of that end-to-end monitoring, make sure that every part is monitored and baselined, that you know, day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, what its performance level should be. And if that alters by a lot in a bad way, know that you've got something that you have to fix. We were not independently monitoring the speed of that circuit because we trusted our provider to do it. Turns out our provider doesn't do that either. So that's a gap that we fix. So do kind of look at that end-to-end, like what all do we need to monitor, what baselines do we need to have, and that's just going to get you in a better place. You're not scrambling, you're just like, okay, this is the one bit that's slower than it usually is. Let's go ahead and attack that. And I'll get to the question here in just a second. Like we said earlier, monitoring doesn't start and stop at the database level. I know we're database folks, it's a data conference. We need to monitor everything. If we're only monitoring the database, people are always going to be sure that that's what the problem is. And Azure Log Analytics can be a great way to start that. This is a very long page, so I'm not going to show it here, but it's an excellent resource if you don't know anything about log analytics at all, generally unfamiliar with getting your Azure resources kind of plugged into it. This is on the Microsoft Docs. GitHub is a fantastic resource. So before I turn it over to Deepthi for the rest, question?
Would it help get someone neutral monitoring such an incident? Did this ever occur to you? I often realise that it's very challenging to zoom out if you are busy thinking yourself about a bit in the tragedy and possible database issue.
Yeah, so the question basically is, would it help to have somebody neutral involved in those sorts of incidents and somebody kind of maybe a level abstracted monitoring all of this and calming all of us down. Depending on the setup of the organization, absolutely. Like I had our data and infrastructure team, but my background and my love is databases. So yeah, sometimes you take it personally when somebody's like, hey, your server's slow. No, it's not. I built that. It's good. Which isn't always the right attitude to take. Not every organization's set up for that, but if you do have, and some of it's just getting to know people's personalities. If you do have somebody maybe in that interim level between like a customer support and a infrastructure team, data team, that might be nice to have kind of an instant leader. I've worked places where they had that, like instant captain, and they knew a little about everything. So that can be handy if you have the manpower to do it. So, Deepthi, story time is over to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's so wonderful. All of your stories inspired us as well, learned so much. So the first story of mine is the application team saying like this is a database problem for sure. So they are almost sure about it that it is a database problem. So what has happened? Application team actually couldn't connect to the database. So they are getting this generic timeout errors. So this has been happening since long time, but whenever these things were happening, they were worried, and then once the connections are back again, they forget about it. You all know about it, right? How it goes. Until it becomes a real bottleneck, nobody wants to work on it. So there is this time when it became a bottleneck and there were no more connections made to the database. So all we are seeing is a timeout errors, and application team did some research and they figured out like, yes, this is a database problem for sure. So they throwed everything upon me as a DBA. I'm the lone DBA out there at that moment. So I took the thing, and then I started looking into all of those performance troubleshooting things that I showed you in the previous slides. I looked all of them. I looked at the error logs. Nothing was showing up in the error logs. Nothing was showing up in connecting to the database itself. And I used this Dynatrace tool. If somebody was asking like multi-layered, is there any multi-layered monitoring tool? This is a multi-layered monitoring tool. I'm not advertising, but that is what I use, the Dynatrace tool. It all the way, it starts from the application till the database connection. If anything is going weird in between the layers, we will easily identify. So I used that. I came to know that nothing is even connecting to the database. So I told them that it is not a SQL Server problem, of course, right? As a DBA, I need to defend myself. So I told them. But they were like, okay, it's not database, but the timeout error, right? The timeout error is coming from the database and from the server. So it's totally, again, SQL Server. So at that moment, I took a step ahead. I went out of my comfort zone. I took a different hat. I put the developer hat. And then I wanted to figure out what the actual problem is because nobody else wanted to do that. I worked with the developer for a couple of days to even figure out what was the problem. So we went into the application. So inside the application, that's a very old application using the VB code. You know, the VB code is the oldest code. Nobody wants to use it right now. They wanted to rewrite their code. So inside the code, they have the open connections to the SQL Server, but then they did not explicitly mention the close connection, SQL connection, closing of the SQL connection. So there were like several places where they were open but never closed. That caused like filled up the application pool with the open connections, and the application pool completely filled out, and that's when they couldn't able to connect to the SQL Server. So that's the actual problem. So we figured that out, and the application team agreed to rewrite the entire application. So once they rewrite the entire application with the explicitly, opening and closing the application, the problem has completely solved. So what did I learn from it, right? Next slide, Matt. So what did I learn from it? When the other teams are blaming you, right? And you know it's not your problem anymore. But still, nobody wants to look into it. So there should be a solution for that problem, right? So I went ahead and I took that step to even figure out the problem, which took me a little bit closer to the solution. And remaining calm during chaos is really important. Just like the Matt said, like it will help you because if you are not calm, that stress will become more, and then it will not even help you in solving the problem. So remaining calm when everybody is yelling at you, I know it's very difficult, but we can make it, And again, the tool I use is Dynatrace tool. It really helped me figure it out, as well as the SQL logs as well, the error logs. Next slide. The second story. We always talk about the backups, right? Hey, make sure you have those backups and make sure those backups are valid. Go ahead and check if those backups are valid all the time. But do we only have to think about the database backups? Not only the database backups, we also have to think about the other backups. Like here, in my scenario, the replication. Replication was dropped drastically by a DBA. So here is the situation what happened. My manager wanted to actually pause the replication, to stop the replication. For whatever reason, they decided to pause it. And he requested explicitly to a DBA, one of the DBAs out there, to pause the replication. And the DBA got really confused and he got stressed out and he actually accidentally dropped everything. He dropped the publication, he dropped the subscriber, everything is gone. And I have been receiving these emails, like hundreds of emails every couple of minutes saying replication broke. So I went ahead to see what was the issue, and there is no publication out there. And I was literally shocked. And the moment manager came to know about it, he blamed the entire DBAs. He was yelling like, do you even know how to do your job? Don't you even know? And whatnot. He just started yelling at everybody. And the other DBA, the poor DBA, he's already feeling sorry for what he did. He made by mistake, but who want to care, right? They are continuously yelling. So the best thing that I did was this particular publication server was actually going to be migrated in a couple of months. So I made sure my process goes right during my migration, and I took the backups of the publication, subscriber, everything. So I have that metadata with me. So what is this metadata, right? The metadata about the tables that are going to be replicated, as well as if we are using any filters on the top of it, like these many columns have to be only replicated. Those kind of metadata information, I made sure I scripted, which really, really helped me. I wouldn't know what I would have done if I do not have that backup, because from the subscriber side, the guys who use the subscription database don't even know what columns they are getting and what tables they are getting, they're capturing in the subscriber database. So it would become a chaos, but the backup, the replication backup that I took actually saved me as well as the other DBA out there. So what did I learn from it? Next slide, please. So the lesson learned, documentation definitely matters. I mean, this scenario is the proof, right? If I would have provided a certain documentation to the new DBA who came to the office, right, he would have followed those steps to pause the replication. Since we do not have that replication, again, it's my fault to not have the documentation. Do not ever think that this is certain easy steps. We don't need a documentation for that. It might be easy, but as you do, it might get complicated, right? Because you never know what errors you might face. If you have a documentation of what errors you may face and the solutions included in the documentation, it will really help when you face the same scenario again in the future. So yes, documentation matters. And blaming doesn't help, because here, if you see, my manager was yelling and the other DB was so stressed out. He was looking up to me, and even I was stressed out. But if I get stressed out, there was no other people who can solve that issue. So again, blaming doesn't help. Understanding the situation and supporting each other during those situations really help in solving the problem. And for any DBS out there, even for myself, don't be afraid of making mistakes, but please make sure you have those backups, because if you make mistakes, we do have to have those backups, the valid backups. Next scenario.
All right, and they do run a tight ship, so we're on 4 minutes. Just a heads up.
Okay, I'll just complete that. So don't assume, calm down and test. So this is a very interesting scenario, right? This is a replication again. I know I'm talking more about replication because I face so many issues there. So we have this request. The publisher server is SQL 2012 and the subscriber server is SQL 2000. You know that those 3 version differences, but in the Microsoft documentation, it has clearly mentioned that you can only have the subscriber 2 versions less than the publisher. But here in my scenario, 3 versions less than the server, right? 3 versions less than the publisher. So I thought like it is not possible. I just told them that, I can't do it. I know it is a research team. You are very important and you do not want to upgrade your application, but this is not possible. But they are nowhere near or close to get upgraded their application. So it has to again come to me. I had to do this. So instead of assuming, I decided to go ahead and test it out. Yes, I was able to build the replication properly, but then I faced the situations where the distributor broke every single minute because the snapshot job which you took, like it saves the snapshot location, right? Inside the snapshot folder, those schema files that get generated by the snapshot job, those schema, inside those schema, there were a couple of settings like ANSI padding settings that was supposed to be on, but they were off. In many articles, schema files, it were turned off. So the distribution job was continuously failing, saying that, hey, this particular schema file has this turned off. You need to go ahead and turn it on. So they were like thousands of files. How can I manually do it, right? And the distribution job only shows one file at a time. Now think about it. Fixing one file, then going ahead and running the job. Again, I get another file which is failure, right? So I did so much of research and I found wonderful PowerShell script out there. It can go ahead and search for those files, schema files, and search for the string ANSI padding off. Wherever it is turned off, it will go ahead and automatically turn it on. So what I did, I just took that PowerShell script, and I added in the snapshot job as a second step. So the first thing that happens is take the snapshot, and then the second step is to run this PowerShell job inside the agent job, right? Inside the snapshot agent job. It ran pretty fine. It ran pretty quickly. It automatically solved the problem. For every time it reinitialized the snapshot, it took care of it. The problem was permanently gone, which is like very cool. PowerShell helped me here. So what did I learn from it, right? The next slide, please. So read the documentation, but also do your testing. If you see in my scenario, the documentation said something, but then I tested it out and I figured out, yes, I did face the problems, but I figured out the solution as well, right? So do your testing well. And PowerShell is the king of automation. I can clearly say that because it automated everything here. Within a couple of seconds, it solved the problem for me. The job ran absolutely fine, and I never faced the problem again. I think I'm done.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much. We're really close to time, on time. Feedback. Like I said, for every 10, they will plant a tree. This session, everything else. We want to know how we did. A lot of these sessions are new. For the last 2 years, we haven't been able to do this. So let us know how we did. Contact us directly if you'd like. And here's the way to do all of that. Different ways to find us. Twitter, all that stuff. If you're not on Twitter, that's a great place to get data stuff. But anyway, thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for attending our session. Please provide your feedback. Thank you so much.